very eminent panelists. Let me start by introducing Ambassador Professor Phunchuk Stokden. He's a distinguished academician, a diplomat, and an author, an expert on foreign policy and national security. He's a known authority on Central and Inner Asian affairs. He last served as India's ambassador to the Kyrgyz Republic. He was previously served as the National Security Council Secretariat and director of the Center for Strategic Studies in Jammu and Kashmir. He is the founding president of the Ladakh International Center, Leh, and has been a senior fellow at the Institute of Defense Study and Analysis, New Delhi, as well as a distinguished fellow at the United Services Institution. Ambassador Stokden, welcome to our panel this afternoon. My second panelist, thank you. My second panelist is legendary filmmaker and storyteller Iqbal Malhotra. He holds a first-class degree in economics from the Queen's College University of Cambridge. From 93 to 95, he was advisor on India to the media mogul Rupert Murdoch and has produced over 500 hours of quality television programming for telecast worldwide. Currently, Iqbal is chairman and producer of AIM Television and is a much acclaimed author. One of his books, Kashmir, the Untold Story, Declassified, and we all are looking for his next book, Red Fear, the Chinese Threat, that is set to publish soon. I'm also just going to share a quick screenshot of their books. So we've got, this is Ambassador Stokden's book, The Great Game in Buddhist Himalayas. If you do have a read, it explains a lot that is happening in the region and it gives a historical context to it. A lot of it is what we are also going to be exploring in our session today. I said Iqbal's two books, Kashmir, the Untold Story, written by Iqbal and Maruf, and the second one which is coming off is Red Fear, and China. And I think, again, that's very critical to the current debate that we are seeing. I'm just going to stop sharing. Okay. The theme for today, panelists, is China the aggressor for world politics? And has it created the pandemic? With your permission, I'd like to sort of turn this around in a timeline perspective. Let's look at the present, the past, and therefore the future. I think it'll help us weave together a story of what is happening and what is China's take. So with your permission, my first thought to you is the present pandemic. There are a lot of theories that are doing the round that China could be behind this whole pandemic of COVID. Those theories aside, what I find remarkable is that China was able to contain this to Wuhan, while the rest of the world got hit by it. No other part of China got hit. So, if not the origin, was China allowing for the spread in a strategic manner? So, to my panelists, please, your thoughts.
Who should start?
Iqbal,
Mr. Malhotra,
okay.
You can start that.
Okay. Well, I think the Chinese view this pandemic as a weapon of opportunity. Now, we know that the WHO has been infiltrated by the Chinese, and we know the Director General of the WHO was a Chinese nominee, and he supported the Chinese line as far as the spread of this pandemic went. And there is evidence available now that the Wuhan Health Commission issued a notice on December 30th, 2019, which basically spelled out that there were unusual cases of pneumonia that were happening in Wuhan and that were not responding to the normal usual protocols. This thing continued. Now the Chinese had come to know that this new strain of pneumonia was spreading rapidly. And they very cleverly began to shut down Wuhan, and they began to shut down all flights from overseas into China. But cleverly, what they did not do was that they did not shut down flights out of China. So they, in fact, went to town to organize this great feast in Wuhan on Chinese New Year, Kung Hei Fat Choi. And 100,000 people came for this big banquet, which went into the Guinness Book of Records. And they were all infected with the COVID-19 virus, and they all flew out to different parts. Particularly badly hit was Italy, because there were almost 100,000 Chinese working in near Lake Como in that whole area. So they let the virus spread, and they waited for it to take roots before they went out to the world and said that the virus has been contained in China, and we will share information with you. Now, very interestingly, this virus never really emerged or never originated in the Wuhan market from bats, because firstly, there are no bats in Wuhan. Secondly, bats in the winter hibernate in caves. And the only bats that were there were in these two laboratories in Wuhan, which were experimenting on bat coronaviruses. And that's a known fact. So the argument is a very strong argument, which I don't want to get into because it will detract from the central core of our debate today. And that is that there was a technician who was infected in one of these Wuhan laboratories. And he went to the Hunan seafood market in Wuhan to buy seafood, and he infected the lady who owned the seafood shop. And that lady has been labeled as patient number 001. Now, interestingly, the Chinese then went and scrubbed clean the market, and they sanitized the whole thing so that there was no forensic evidence left. And the world was led to believe that this was a zoonotic virus that jumped from animals to humans, and that the spread came from the seafood market. And the Chinese really had nothing to do with it because it just happened as it happened. So, I mean, this was the whole drama. And they were clever. They thought that now let's make a play for dominating the world. We've got to stand up and fight. And this is a weapon of opportunity, and let's use it as that. So that's my take on it.
Ambassador Sobhan, would you like to step in as well?
Well, I think I tend to agree with Mr. Malhotra, because I'm also not a scientist to make a point that this has originated from China. And I do not see that mainstream scientific community is endorsing the view that this has originated in China. Nonetheless, I think I agree with him, because the coronavirus has been used as a strategic tool in the larger politics of the world. And the debate that had started after the outbreak is that a lot of conspiracy theories had emerged, that there's so much debate within the United States scientific community and also in bureaucracy, that who is responsible for this, whether United States itself is responsible. Then we've heard about the vaccine lobby trying to, prop up this issue. Therefore, I think mostly now it is in the realm of diplomacy, in the realm of strategy, the realm of political debate. So we are talking coronavirus, the COVID-19, within the context of world politics. Therefore, there is a backdrop of whether it is an extension of the trade war between the United States and China, and the larger geopolitics that are taking place, the balance of power. The way now things are unfolding right now within the East Asian theater, or in the South China Sea, or in Taiwan Strait, coronavirus is very much part of the larger game. So I think we have to look at from the political angle rather than the scientific angle.
So I think very well shared by the whole argument that it was in a way allowed strategically to the advantage of the Chinese to spread globally without restraint. Any measure to, as I said, the origin of it may not matter. The fact that it was allowed to spread, in a way, it was weaponized, the opportunity of it. Ambassador, you have been the Indian ambassador. Now I'm going to step back to the past, to Kyrgyzstan. And you've had a ringside view, especially of the Xinjiang autonomous region of China. There are multiple reports that are coming in presently of the whole issue with the Uyghurs there, activists being deported, them taking a slightly softer stance to, Russia and China in a way having some sort of a unsaid agreement in this region. And I think it comes back to a lot in the history of the region. So I'd like you to, put some thought to the strategic importance of that whole area from Kyrgyzstan down to Ladakh. And for our viewers, the ambassador is currently reaching us from Leh, and currently the whole debate with or the concerns of the border region is right there, and it'll be very interesting to get your view on that.
No, yes, I'm not very far from Galwan Valley right now, and things are really serious, very tense now. What I see here is, again, the history is being repeated, replay of the history. The whole Middle Kingdom theory of China is being replayed with a modern tool. That's a really, really dangerous. The Chinese worldview of the global order and the way they look at the world has a historical rooting. That is well known. But what has happened in this theater, whether it is in the Far East theater or in the Russian theater, Central Asian theater, or in the Himalayan theater, we have to structurally divide. You talked about Kyrgyzstan, the Kazakhstan area, and the Russian area. The structural issue here is that after the Soviet collapse, there is a strategic retreat of Russia and Central Asia from their theater. And as a result, they have to compromise to the strategic reality. Although I do believe this is a tactical adjustment of the Russians and as well as the Central Asians. But when I was there is a huge backlash. Of course, the backlash was not in terms of military, but in terms of nationalism, in terms of resource nationalism. As the Chinese came into that region, whether in Kazakhstan or in Kyrgyzstan, they were exploiting the resources of Central Asia. Now, because of the Belt and Road and many other issues have come in, huge investment in the oil industry, in the gas industry, in the mineral industry. So I think the Central Asians, whether Kyrgyz or Kazakh, are now through resource management. They are not able to do it through politically, diplomatically, or militarily. So there is a understanding right now, a retreat in this region to say that, look, I have to compromise with the rise of China. But I think this is just a phase. I believe any expansion of any country or rising power has a diminishing return. After all, imperial also fall. We have seen there's a history. Currently, yes, the rise of China is a reality. It's all about growing power of China, therefore world dominance. But this has happened in the past also, whether it was Tsarist Russia, whether it is Soviet Union, whether it is British Empire, whether it is the current United States, dominance of power in the world. Every rise of power has a sort of implications in terms of territory, in terms of economy, in terms of capturing of market. In the past, of course, we suffered colonization of the British Empire. East India Company was exactly what the Chinese were doing today. So therefore, I think we have to see from the historical angle. And here in Central Asian theater, I do see that there will be an imperial outstretch by the Chinese one day, and they will have to suffer because Chinese are expending too much right now in all theater. And in the context of India, it's not like Central Asia because India is a giant. It's not Kyrgyzstan or Tajikistan. Last territorial deal which China had was with Tajikistan. Chinese claimed 28,000 square kilometer, but agreed for 1/3 of it or 3% of it. But this is what they go for, the maximalist and agree for the minimalist position. So in the case of India, perhaps they are trying to push us in Aksai Chin that we must cede Aksai Chin and formally divide the territory, which is not possible. We are a stronger country in the neighboring neighborhood. There are 21 countries China has neighbor with, and with each country they have problems. Out of 21 countries, only 3 countries stand up, which is Japan, Russia, and India. Russia has compromised. Japan has its problem. I think India is the only country out of 21 countries which is willing to stand up to China. So therefore, you see tension, but there are many details in this, the structural aspect of it. We cannot go into to those issues.
So you were saying that at a diplomatic level as well, you feel that there has been a collapse. Do you see any, and especially given that whole region, what should India be doing to sort of mend those diplomatic ties? You being a former ambassador to the region, I think you would have the pulse of that. And while I get you to look at that, since we're looking at the past of the region, what is the strategic geopolitical importance of Ladakh and that entire region from Kyrgyzstan to Ladakh?
Arjun, I want to just intercede here and make a couple of points. You see, you got to realize one thing, that Ladakh has three passes. In fact, the Ladakh is a part of the erstwhile state of the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir. And these three passes are very important. One is the Mintaka Pass, one is the Khunjerab Pass, and the third is the Karakoram Pass. Now, each of these different passes were invasion routes into India, into Kashmir, into Ladakh, and into continental India in the past. Now, the British were very well aware of this fact. And in 1935, there were rumors that the Kingdom of Hunza was going to secede and join up with Xinjiang, which was then under Russian domination and was ruled by different Chinese warlords. So they then took over a lease on Gilgit from the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir. And for 75 years, they took over the control of the Gilgit Agency and the 7 vassal states of Baltistan, Kohe Khizar, and Hunza, and there were seven of these vassal states. Now, this was under the direct control of the British, and the reason was that they were very worried that there would be a Russian invasion of India from Xinjiang. Now, by the by, when the Second World War started and the race to achieve nuclear domination and superiority between the big powers commenced, uranium ore was discovered in Xinjiang. And this uranium ore became a very key thing, and the Russians walked into Xinjiang. There was a Chinese general there called Sheng Shikai, and this Chinese general brought the Russians in, and they began to take the uranium ore out of Xinjiang into the border of Soviet Union, where there was the nuclear testing site at Semipalatinsk. In fact, this entire trade continued for quite a few years. And at the time of independence, the British were excluded from the race to find the secrets of the nuclear bomb by the Americans after the death of President Roosevelt. And they then set up seismic monitoring stations in Gilgit and acoustic monitoring stations. And Gilgit became a very vital part and very vital cog of the British Empire. And that is one of the reasons why the invasion of Kashmir took place by the Kabylis. I don't want to get into that whole Kashmir issue right now. But the Prime Minister at that point of time was presented with this Faustian choice of either he permits British bases to be present in independent India for as long as it's necessary, because the British cabinet said we have to get the bomb, it's vital for us. Or he agrees to the partition of Jammu and Kashmir. Now I'm going against the prevailing orthodoxy. I am putting forth a completely heretic point of view. And that point of view is this, that because the Prime Minister of India at that point of time was anti-colonialist, and he did not believe that British bases should remain in independent India, he issued that famous firman to Major General Kulwant Singh and General Thimaya that tell the Indian Army to halt where the Kashmiri-speaking areas end, because beyond the Kashmiri-speaking areas, we are not interested to recover those lands. Now, that was a defeatist policy, and it led to the de facto partition of Jammu and Kashmir long ago. And that is why, because he had accepted the partition of the state, that he went ahead and signed the Indus Waters Treaty in 1960 with Pakistan and gave away 80% of the most vital rivers to Pakistan. So it's a very complex scenario. And the Chinese invaded Aksai Chin not in 1952 when they were building this famous road, but they invaded Aksai Chin in 1950 when Stalin had Mao in Moscow for 2 months, virtually as a prisoner, between the 12th of December 1949 and the 16th of February 1950. And he forced Mao to sign an agreement to exploit unilaterally the mineral resources of the Tarim Basin in Xinjiang. Now, these minerals there were uranium, thorium, beryllium, molybdenum, petroleum, and gold. So the die was cast. The Chinese army moved in March 1950 through the Indian settlement of Haji Langar. Now, it's very interesting. The whole basis of sovereignty says that you need to collect land revenue from an area if you claim sovereign rights. You need to be able to dispense justice to your citizens if you want to claim sovereign rights. Your currency must be legal tender if you want to claim sovereign rights, and you must be recruiting people from that region into your army. On all four counts, this region of Aksai Chin belonged to the Maharaja of Kashmir. And as far as legal tender goes, the Indian rupee, the silver rupee, was legal tender till 1950 in Lhasa. It also worked in Kashgar in Xinjiang. So the Chinese had the Russian support. Russian geologists, hydrographers, etc. came in. They stole the Karkash River from us because it was very vital to feed the Tarim River, which in turn fed waters into Lake Lopnor, where the Chinese nuclear tests, the Russians identified that as far back as 1950 as the location of the Chinese nuclear testing facilities. And then they also wanted the Shaksgam River because that was the other tributary of the Tarim River, and the Shaksgam River they got from Pakistan because we were not able to recover the Shaksgam Valley because, as I said, the Prime Minister of India called a ceasefire at that point of time. So this region, excuse me, is very vital for India, and it is still vital because my guess is the Chinese today want to grab hold of the waters of the Indus, the Galwan River, the Changchemo River, the Nubra River, and the Shyok River, because these four rivers merge into the Indus, and the Indus crosses over into Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. And over there, they've got these two big dams, the Diamar Basha Dam and the Bunji Dam, on which they're spending $13 billion. And they want the water supply to continue unimpeded to those two dams. In fact, if you go back to 1963, when the Americans brokered 5 rounds of talks on Kashmir between India and Pakistan was represented by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and India was represented by Sardar Swaran Singh, the talks broke down. Because in 1963, Pakistan demanded the whole of Ladakh. Now, in 1963, Ladakh was 95% Buddhist. And the country had been divided 15 years before 1947 on the basis of the two-nation theory that Pakistan was the homeland for Muslims. Now, by extension, Pakistan was being touted as a homeland for the Buddhists as well, which is why they wanted 95% Buddhist majority Ladakh to join Pakistan. That was absolutely absurd and a bizarre statement. But that told you that even in 1963, the Pakistanis knew how vital Ladakh was for them and for the survival of their country, because the Indus River flows through Ladakh, and the Chinese knew it as well. But we never recognized that fact for some strange reason.
Iqbal, you were also mentioning earlier, the fact that India's claim in this whole region expanded all the way up, all the way to Tibet. Revenue was being collected from the region, right?
Yes.
So could you talk a bit on that?
Yes, there is a principality of Minsar, which is 10 kilometers from Mount Kailash. Let me tell you, I have driven through Turkmenistan, I have driven through Uzbekistan, I have driven through Tajikistan, I have crossed land borders there, I have driven into northern Afghanistan, and I have driven in Tibet. I've driven 1,500 kilometers in Tibet from Lhasa to Mount Kailash, and I have also driven up to the kingdom of Guge, which is close to Gartok, where the Indian army had a military escort over there. Now, this area of Minsar has been paying revenue to the king of Ladakh, and after the king of Ladakh to the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir since the 17th century. And this kingdom was, and this land, because after all, our epics, our history, this history of the Vedic civilization, all goes towards Mount Kailash, because Mount Kailash is the abode of Lord Shiva. And Lake Mansarovar is the headwaters of the Brahmaputra, the Ganga, the Karnali, the Satluj, and the Indus. These are very important areas. I'm sorry, the screen seems to have gone off. Oh God. Are you seeing me?
No, one second. Just nothing.
1 second. I've just got to find the link.
It could be. Yeah, I think you're back.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So what I was saying is that this area is very vital, and I've been there, and it was captured in the 19th century by General Zorawar Singh, but his logistics failed, and so he had to retreat. But after he retreated, there was a Treaty of Chushul, which was a tripartite treaty signed by the Kingdom of Jammu and Kashmir, the Dalai Lama, and the Daoguang Emperor of the Qing Empire. So they recognized boundaries, they recognized claim lines, and all of that was washed aside by the Chinese when they invaded in 1950, and then we acquiesced because the security of our country, the history, the culture, everything was sacrificed at the altar of non-alignment. This non-alignment was the worst philosophy that was ever foisted on us, and we had to follow this mantra for ever and ever and ever. And, what has it brought us but only grief?
And you were also saying that this whole region is both strategically important in terms of the wealth of minerals and resources it has, and also in terms of the waters from the rivers that flow through it. If we are not going to be protective about it, what do we stand to lose if this plays out in this current scenario?
We stand to lose everything. We'll stand to lose the waters. Do you know that the Siachen Glacier, people have been saying, give it away to Pakistan and demilitarize it? Do you know that the Siachen Glacier holds 100 million acre feet of fresh water? I have made a film on the Siachen Glacier for Discovery Channel. I went there and I discovered that the water that is contained in the glacier is enough to supply the needs of the city of Delhi, 20 million people of Delhi, for 55 years. Now we have to defend that. We have to defend our water resources because the world is running out of fresh water. And the Chinese need water for their semiconductor industry, but we'll get into that later on. But I mean, we have to defend it. This is an existential issue for us. We cannot just run away and say, give this land to the Chinese. This is our land. It's our territory. It's our dharma to protect it.
Perfect. Ambassador Stobden, I'm going to quickly ask you, in terms of the history of the region, especially with Ladakh, there has been conflicts which have been with China, with Tibet. Not now. How back do they go? Could you give us an insight into that?
Yeah, I think I agree with Mr. Malhotra when he said that this is a very vital region. This is the only region in our country which is so important strategically, which we really haven't understood. It's an access, actually, an access that India gets to East Asia, to Central Asia, to Europe, to Russia, everywhere. But then just we didn't about.
I think we lost the ambassador's audio.
I think it's the 4G that's playing up.
It's the 4G that's playing up. But hopefully we have the ambassador back shortly. Iqbal, one very interesting thing when you were talking about Kailash Mansarovar, you were also talking about Indian philosophy of the region. A very interesting point would come into what drives India as the core base of karma versus what drives China. What is the core philosophy that drives the Chinese? Sorry, Ambassador, we'd lost you. Iqbal, I'll come back.
Okay. I've come. Yeah. Now, this is the only area, if you can carefully think about it, all the civilizations meet somewhere here, whether the Chinese, the Indian, the Persian, the Russians, the Turks, everything, including Islamic civilization, they all converge at this point of, the geography here. This is the only access point India has. But ever since the British left us, we were not able to understand the geopolitical importance of this area. As a result, we suffered. As long as the British was ruling India, they were able to have a hold. We used to have a consulate in Kashgar called Chini Bagh. I've been there a couple of years ago. We used to have a consulate in Lhasa called Dikiling. I haven't been there, but Dikiling is a very important outpost of India. Ladakh used to exchange letters with Tsarist Russia.
So I think...
Should we come back to that question of the belief systems of India and China?
Yes. So what is the belief system?
See, India's belief system is based on the epics of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, and that goes all the way down through Southeast Asia and the overriding philosophy is the law of karma. And sorry, shall I just quickly continue?
So, Ambassador, we'll come back to you in a minute. Sorry, we were losing you on audio. Just let the audio stabilize and the connection.
So the law of karma says, and that is what Lord Krishna told Arjun on the battlefield of the Mahabharata, that you have to defend yourself. It's your divine right to defend yourself. And defending yourself means that if the onus of initiating the karma rests with the other person, you have to defend yourself, and then you can kill him, but that karmic burden doesn't fall upon your shoulders. Now, the Chinese philosophy is based very different. It's based on the philosophy articulated during the the spring-autumn period of the Eastern Zhou Empire that was in China between 722 and 481 BC. This was before Alexander and Cyrus the Great. And they articulated a systemic view that we are divinely ordained to rule the world, and world domination is a part of our divine right. Now, this belief system was a systemic belief, and this became part of their epic, that they are the divine beings on the earth and that they have to rule the world. Now, this continued, but unfortunately, there was no Chinese emperor who could impose his divine will. The first person who picked this theory up was Cyrus the Great from Persia. He was followed by Alexander the Great from Greece. Then he was followed by Genghis Khan from Mongolia. And it's only in the 15th century, during the Ming period, when the first voyages to dominate the world took place from China, when a 200-ship fleet under Admiral Zheng He sailed from Shanghai into the Indian Ocean. They made 7 treasure voyages. And it was during that period that the Chinese made the first incursion into continental India in 1430, when the eunuch, Zheng He, who was a eunuch, his fleet sailed from up the Farakka river, up the Ganges, up to Jaunpur, because at that point of time, Bengal was a tributary state of China, and the king of Jaunpur had threatened the king of Bengal, and the Chinese fleet, a downsized fleet that could negotiate the waterways, they sailed up to Jaunpur and they threatened the king of Jaunpur and said, lay off. Now, the Chinese didn't have very good intelligence at that time. The Tughlaq dynasty had collapsed, and there was a sort of a power vacuum. The Sayyids were coming to power in India. If that fleet had sailed up to the Jamuna, they would have been able to dominate Delhi. And they couldn't also go to Bodh Gaya and dominate and say that they've captured the temporal seat of Buddhism. We were lucky, we were fortunate. And so the fleet moved away. Now this world domination concept then took a very big beating in 1839 during the First Opium War. And your viewers should know that there were 2 Indians and 1 Englishman. The Indians were Jamshedji Gigi Boy from Bombay and David Sassoon from Pune. And the Scotsman was Jardine Matheson. These 3 people brought the Qing Empire down to its knees because they sold opium to China, and they enslaved 30 to 40% of the male population of China and made them into opium addicts. And that's where the term comes, Hafimchi. The Chinese were all opium addicts. And the 30% of the revenue of the government of India till the early 1930s, of course, it was by then only about 12 or 15% came from opium sales. So the Chinese actually had to, they had this angst that they've been made into a nation of addicts by the British and the Indians, and they hated us then and they hate us now, because at that point of time, they said that the British dog has an Indian tail. And the Indian army was in China one way or the other from 1839 to 1939, where they maintained the writ of the British Empire.
I think some very, very strong points on that, Iqbal. Thank you. Ambassador Stobden, you were telling about the region as well, and I think that maps in so well with what Iqbal has been talking about in terms of China's sense of divine right. So, Ambassador Stobden, if you're there, sorry, I think we lost him here. So we'll wait for Ambassador Stobden.
Yeah, anyway, all of this is now in my forthcoming book. You can, I'm just giving you a preview of parts of it.
I think it's a very exciting trailer for the. So I think, the questions then come in is in terms of the current land grab, the overall scenario of the current land grab. Sorry, we've got Ambassador back.
Okay, please go ahead.
Comment on the whole conflict with China in the Ladakh region from way back, Ambassador.
Yeah, because Chinese are following Tibetan history. That's the very important point to be noticed. Whereas we are not owning up our own history. You don't own up the Ladakh history. You don't own up the Sikh history, the Dogra history. You endorse rather indirectly the Tibetan history. So you get played into the Chinese hand. When we asked the Tibetans in 1947 to come and let's settle our border, they refused to come. Instead, they said, our areas are controlled by India, please hand it over to us. It was taken by the British Empire, please hand it over. So they had claim over the Himalayas. Similarly, in Xinjiang was also something like Tibetan status under the Chinese. But when the Soviets were coming in Xinjiang, they also surrendered to China. Today, to say that they are friends, it would be very, very difficult. When Mao Zedong says, my 5 fingers are in India, who told him that 5 fingers are in India? He is following the Tibetan history. The Tibetans told him, my 5 fingers are in India. So now those who have taken your land from you, from the Sikhs or the Dogras or the Ladakhis, they are supposed to be our guest. So how do you find an explanation to this? Now you are accusing the Chinese. Chinese are following certain guidelines. They said, look, I have this document to claim. But our side say, no, there is no Ladakhi history. There is no Sikh history. You've given up all this. The only thing you have is to outsource your politics to United States. Now, why would United States would think about your interest? He will try to break up China. And here you have to play a role for that. He's not interested in expansion of Indian empire. He would like to create an independent Tibet. He wants to see an independent Xinjiang. He is not interested in expansion of India. I would say Mount Kailash is mine, the original Ladakhi land. Mr. Malhotra has been to Gartok. Gartok was a Ladakhi town. We lost it. The 5th Dalai Lama took it from us brutally, through force. But for Aurangzeb, we would have lost entire Ladakh to the Tibetan Empire at that time. But Aurangzeb, nobody understands who Aurangzeb was here. And so therefore, the basic premise on which our narrative is built on the Himalaya is completely wrong. We have to rethink about history. Something is British, something is American, but nothing is our own. Therefore, the discrepancy comes. We really don't know. Now in Aksai Chin, we really don't know whether it's a Ladakhi area or the Tibetan area or a Turkic area or a Sikh area. All the names suggest Shahidullah, Hazi Langar, Galwan Valley, or Daulat Begulde. These are not Ladakhi names. Surely these are not Tibetan names. These are something else. But we don't have enough history about this. Just because General Zorawar Singh went there up to Shahidullah, but we never hold it properly all these years, centuries. So willy-nilly we relied on the British history, but the British history is very cartographic, very bureaucratic. It's not cultural at all. So where the Chinese are playing asymmetric strategy of culture, civilization, language, monastery, reincarnation, soul is being born here, soul is being born that side also. How do you define? In Indian constitution, we have no space for reincarnation. If somebody is born the other side, if his land is lying on our side, how are you going to demarcate the boundary? So there's a huge complexity here. We really don't understand. Suddenly we realize this is our land. But how, we don't know. We haven't played the history properly. So we outsource it to United States. The whole mantle of geopolitics in this area has been handed over to the Americans. Now the CIA is operating everywhere in the Himalayas. Now we really don't know what CIA is up to. He may like to fragment even India also, sitting in the Tibet or somewhere in Ladakh or in Nepal. So therefore, we have to rethink. Surely we were not able to have enough intellectual, enough scholarship to do that in the past. But certainly today we are capable. We have the assets, we have the resources to think about ourselves. Otherwise, nobody is going to think about I think 90 to 99% of our interest should be handled by ourselves rather than handing it over to somebody else.
I have a point of disagreement here with the ambassador. And the fact is that, you see, Haji Langar, which was the northernmost settlement in Ladakh that came under the kingdom of Maharaja Hari Singh, was so named because the man over there, a Muslim gentleman, he had gone on a Hajj. In those days, it's very difficult to go on a Hajj from Ladakh all the way down to Mecca and back. You have to go to Bombay and then go by sea. And he decided after he came back that he would serve free food to anybody and everybody who was going to cross the Taklamakan desert and go across to Kashgar. So it was called Haji Langar, and every traveler was given free food over there. Now, as regards the Tibetans go, there are many factions in Tibet, and the Tibetans were defeated by the Indian army led by Colonel Francis Younghusband in 1902. And after that time, India has had no problem with the Tibetans at all. In fact, till March of 1950, there is evidence on record, and it is in my new book, that the government of India was selling weapons, including Sten guns, artillery guns, to the Tibetans. And the Tibetans came to negotiate with the Chinese. The Tibetans needed support. The Tibetans had a good army. They had about 15,000 troops who were facing the Chinese on the eastern border in 1950. In fact, the Chinese had entered into Tibet 15, 20 kilometers and then halted there saying, "We've entered Tibet." But the Tibetans fought very hard. The President Truman offered support to Prime Minister Nehru, provided he was willing to join the Western Alliance. And he said, "You join the Western Alliance in the Cold War, and I will support you. I will fly your troops into Lhasa. You defend Tibet." But Nehru didn't want to defend Tibet because he felt it was a colonial hangover, despite the fact that the British consul in Tibet in 1947, Hugh Richardson, he lowered the British Union Jack and he raised the tricolor, and he became the ambassador of the Indian government. And I have interviewed Major Atre, who led the last Indian Army detachment stationed in Gartok. I've done a film on this whole issue. So, I mean, the point is this, that Nehru betrayed the Tibetans. They came to Delhi in September 1950 to talk to the Chinese ambassador. And every time there was an opportunity to support Tibet, Mr. Nehru betrayed the Tibetans because he wanted to woo Mao Zedong, because without Mao Zedong, his entire edifice of non-alignment was not going to succeed. And this non-alignment compromised India's security, because Sardar Patel had warned about the Chinese threat. There was a position paper which was given to Prime Minister Attlee 2 days before the Indian army entered Kashmir on 27th October. On the 25th of October, 1947, this position paper was given to His Majesty's government, which explained that India is entering Jammu and Kashmir because India wants to recover the whole state. Then this whole issue came up about the British monitoring stations and British bases in independent India. And Mr. Nehru decided that no, he didn't want British bases, and he was willing to partition Kashmir and halt the Indian army from recovering the rest of the occupied territories, because this was the altar of non-alignment. And the Chinese periodically and systematically betrayed him. They betrayed him, and they were the cause of Nehru's death. And Nehru never even realized in 1954, when he signed away our rights, extraterritorial rights in Tibet. Tibet was a buffer state between India and China. And the Chinese border never extended to India. The only area where the Chinese border touched India was the Xinjiang and Ladakh, that entire region. And that region also, we betrayed the Uyghurs. They used to send their children to study in St. Joseph's School in Srinagar. The entire Uyghur intelligentsia was in India, but we were so weak. We were not aware, as Ambassador Stobdan said, we were not aware of our own national interests, of our own history, that we compromised ourselves completely. I disagree with this view of the Americans, because the Americans came to our aid. If the Americans hadn't come to our aid, if the Americans hadn't started Operation Circus in the 1950s, we would have been very badly compromised here. We can go into that debate, but I think you're running out of time, so I won't dwell on that. But my point is this, that history has a different perspective depending on who's narrating it. And the facts are there for all to see.
So I think, Iqbal, just to also summarize, I think there was.
But that's a Cold War. That's a Cold War narrative that you're narrating.
Maybe Cold War narrative, but today we're in a Cold War again. It's the world against China.
Yeah, but
Either you join the Chinese and the Russians and the Pakistanis and the North Koreans.
We agreed to Tibet being part of China only after Tibetans surrendered themselves in 1952. So that's the point. That's a fact.
They never surrendered.
I mean, we didn't do unilaterally.
We cut off their arms and ammunition supply.
I think the ambassador had raised a point in his book also, which was going back to independence and the time that Tibet was invited and they didn't, join in on the celebrations, etc. So I think, see, they are.
According to Tibetans, I am also a Tibetan. Would you like to do that? I mean, I don't understand this politics. It's fine if I become a Tibetan. That's fine. I have no issues.
I think
entire Buddhism
this is
was
not how
converted
the
into
Chinese and
sanghas.
Tibetan work. They work culturally, they work civilizationally.
The entire Buddhism
it doesn't work on bureaucratic stuff.
The entire Buddhism in
asymmetric
Tibet.
strategy, this is what is it called?
Sir, the entire Buddhism in Tibet was established by Padmasambhava, who was a Punjabi like myself. And he went from the Swat Valley and he organized the Tibet into sanghas.
There are two types of Buddhism. Dalai Lama always paid allegiance to Qing dynasty. Ladakh never played. Buddhism is all over the world. That's a different issue. Even in China, there is Buddhism.
Qing dynasty was brought down. Qing dynasty was brought down by two Indians, by David Sassoon and by Jamshedji Jijiboy. They sold opium.
But I can't say Tibetan is Indian. That's Padmasambhava was Indian, but those who paid allegiance to Padmasambhava are Indians. But Dalai Lama himself doesn't believe in Padmasambhava.
Of course he does, sir.
Altogether.
There's a book by Thomas Laird called The Story of Tibet.
Yeah, so sorry, we're running out of time. So I'm just going to wrap up with this, Iqbal. I think the ambassador has some valid points on his side. I think you have some very
That's his point of view.
So both of you have your point of views on it. Both of you also have some very historically compelling factors to it. In terms of Tibetan Buddhism and Buddhism from Ladakh, which is a different form. Again, it's the Katyut form.
It's Kushan Buddhism. It's Indian Buddhism, Kashmiri Buddhism.
So I think let's leave that debate open. My last point would be in terms of the future. What is it that we could do to try and balance all of this out? Does China run free and continue all of this? Or so just a last 30-second thought from both of you, and let's wrap the session up.
We have to fight. We have to fight. It's an existential battle for us. We have to put up a robust defense, and we have to stop the Chinese in their tracks. There's no other choice.
Ambassador Stokman?
If China is our priority, the core issue, core threat is China, then we have to build ourselves up. It's a domestic problem of India. We don't have unity. We don't have economic growth. We don't have technology. We don't have innovation, which the Chinese have done. We have to catch up with China, which is a long haul. It's not going to happen tomorrow. So therefore, the answer for China lies in a domestic Indian situation, not with fighting with China. I mean, it's very simplistic to say, I will boycott Chinese product, but how? In what manner? And the Americans are not going to allow you to come to United States. They say Make in America program.
We are not that weak. We are not that weak. सरफरोशी की तमन्ना अब हमारे दिल में है. देखना है बाजुए कातिल.
वो तो ठीक है, जज्बा तो ठीक है, and all that is fine. But in reality, we can't make anything.
Parting thought is I think Ambassador Stokman picked up an interesting point. By boycotting Chinese goods, one of the other things which has happened is there was a call by a politician to boycott Chinese food in India. Interestingly, it's sold by Indians. So the people who are out of jobs or businesses that are losing money is Indian money. And if you feed any Chinese, Indian Chinese, they will say this is not Chinese food. So I don't get the whole thing on it.
That's just an emotional, jingoistic, illogical demand.
Yes, so I don't think we can be jingoistic approach. We have to have a larger approach. I think all sides must converge together on this. We are all for India together, and I think that is the only way to build it. Unify together, bring in all points of views, and lead the thing. Thank you to both of my panelists. There are many contentions out there that still need answers, but I thank you for both of your very unique point of views on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Arjun.